Of women.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be splitting my time with the member from Edmonton Centre today.
Madam Speaker, it's a pleasure for me to take part in this debate on Bill C-16, an act to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code.
Designed to support and facilitate the inclusion of transgender and other gender-diverse people in Canadian society. Diversity and inclusion are values that are important to us as Canadians. And yet we have heard repeatedly from trans and gender-diverse Canadians that they still do not feel safe or fully included in Canadian society. Social science research also shows that many transgender and other gender-diverse Canadians are not yet able to fully participate in our society. They face negative stereotypes, harassment, discrimination, and sometimes violence. We know that discrimination and violence have significant impacts on social participation and an individual's sense of safety in the public sphere. Research conducted by the Trans Pulse survey found that approximately 2/3 of trans people in Ontario had avoided public spaces or situations because they feared being harassed or being perceived or outed as a trans. The survey also indicated that the majority of trans Ontarians had avoided public washrooms because of these fears. Trans Ontarians also avoided traveling abroad, going to the gym, shopping at the mall, and eating out in restaurants, all commonplace, everyday activities and pleasures that many of us are able to enjoy comfortably. But for many trans people, these activities can be fearful because of their previous experiences of harassment and discrimination. The research also shows that transgender or other gender-diverse people face significant obstacles in obtaining employment. And this is not due to a lack of qualifications. In fact, the Trans Pulse survey results I mentioned earlier showed that 44% have a post-secondary degree. But trans people are significantly underemployed, with many having been fired or turned down for a job because they are trans. Others felt that they had to turn down a job that they were offered because of a lack of trans-positive or safe work environment. It's clear that too many transgender and gender-diverse people are being deprived of the opportunity to contribute to flourish in our society. This is important not just for trans people, but for us all. When a person loses an opportunity to work or is too fearful to go out shopping or to eat in a restaurant, we all lose a potential contribution to the workplace, to the economy, and to our collective social life. Discrimination is a matter of concern to us all. It both undermines that individual's freedom to make the life they are able and wish to have, and it deprives us all of their participation in our society. This bill is just the beginning, but it's an important beginning. It's another step towards greater acceptance and inclusion. By adding the grounds of gender identity and gender expression to the prohibited grounds of discrimination listed in Sections 2 and 3 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, we will protect the freedom to live openly. The amendments proposed by this bill will make it clear that discrimination in employment against trans people is unacceptable and a violation of the Canadian Human Rights Act. An employer cannot refuse to hire or promote a qualified individual simply because that person is trans or gender diverse. These amendments will make it clear that federally regulated employers and service providers will need to provide accommodation for transgender and other gender diverse individuals when required, and treat them in a manner that corresponds with their lived gender. Explicit recognition will also serve to promote understanding and awareness about trans people and their rights. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I now want to address one of the amendments that this bill proposes to make to the Criminal Code, which is to expand the hate propaganda offences in the Criminal Code to protect those who are targeted because of their gender identity or gender expression. To put this proposal in context, it's useful to give some of the history of these offences. There are 3 crimes of hate propaganda. They were created in 1970. These are now found in Sections 318 and 319 of the Criminal Code. And these offences are advocating or promoting genocide against an identifiable group, inciting hatred against an identifiable group in a public place that is likely to lead to a breach of peace, and breach of the peace, and willfully promoting hatred other than in private conversation against an identifiable group. As you can see, a key element for all of these offenses is the term identifiable group. When the hate propaganda offenses were first created, and for many years afterwards, the definition of identifiable group was very limited in scope. It was defined in the criminal code to mean a section of the public that was identifiable on the basis of race, color, religion, and ethnic origin. In 2001, the then Member of Parliament for Burnaby Douglas introduced in this House Bill C-415, later reinstated as Bill C-250, and entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Code, Hate Propaganda. This bill proposed to add sexual orientation to the definition of identifiable group in the Criminal Code. He quoted in support of his bill a statement made by the Supreme Court of Canada in the 1990 case of R versus Keegstra, which upheld the constitutionality of the hate propaganda offense of willfully promoting hatred against an identifiable group. The Supreme Court said, "The harms caused by hate propaganda run directly counter to the values central to a free and democratic society, and in restricting the promotion of hatred, Parliament is therefore seeking to bolster the notion of mutual respect necessary in a nation which venerates the equality of all persons." In 2004, Bill C-250 became law. As a result, the definition of identifiable group was expanded to include sexual orientation as an identifiable group for the crimes of hate propaganda. I will now fast-track to 2014, when Bill C-13, the Protecting Canadians from Online Crime Act, received royal assent. One section of that bill amended the definition of identifiable group for the hate propaganda offenses by adding more groups to that definition, specifically the criteria of national origin, sex, age, and mental or physical disability. As we've seen, the definition of identifiable group has been expanded considerably since 1970. This expansion reflects a commitment to equality and the desire of Canadians to protect more and more vulnerable groups in our society from the serious harms to human dignity that flow from the type of vicious hate speech prohibited by these criminal code provisions. Bill C-16 proposes to add two new terms to the definition of identifiable group: gender identity and gender expression. Such an expansion is eminently justifiable on two grounds. First, this expansion will extend to those in our society who are identifiable on the basis of gender identity and gender expression the same protections already afforded to other groups in Canadian society, such as those identifiable on the basis of their sex and sexual orientation. This helps to promote equality before the law and throughout Canadian society for trans people. Second, this expansion will explicitly recognize that those who are identifiable on the basis of their gender identity and gender expression are in need of protection by the criminal law. For example, the TransPulse survey I mentioned earlier indicates that trans people are the targets of specifically directed violence. 20% had been physically or sexually assaulted for being trans, and another 34% had been verbally threatened or harassed but not assaulted. Here in Canada, we criminalize hate propaganda in part because it undermines the dignity and respect of the targeted group. It undermines their sense of belonging and inclusion in society. Adding gender identity and gender expression to the list will send a clear message that hate propaganda against trans and other gender-diverse individuals is not acceptable. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, I encourage all members of this chamber to support this bill. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Minister for her speech and for her very important work on the elimination of violence against women and against transgendered people. In our Status of Women Committee, we've heard a lot of testimony about how even where adequate laws exist, they don't eliminate violence alone. What additional steps does the member believe the government needs to take to eliminate violence against transgendered people?
The Honourable Minister of Status of Women.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's an excellent question, and I think that legislation is the leadership that we need to demonstrate to our country that these rights are inalienable and that people have the right to live safely in their community. But the honourable member makes a very good point, that leadership is the first step. The next step is to bring Canadians along with us, to create a culture where we understand that diversity is our strength, that we're stronger because of our diversity, not in spite of it, that when people have an opportunity to thrive and live in their communities and contribute to their economies, that in fact all of Canada is stronger.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. Honorable député.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I thank my colleague for her speech. We heard her earlier during this debate. The House has been studying this issue for several years now. Witnesses were heard from at committee, and my question is the following. Does she think that the Liberal government should, because this is the third time, if it's passed, that it will be passed by this House, will the government have to ensure that it moves forward quickly? That is, that it be studied quickly, perhaps during a single day at committee, and that it come quickly back to the House and take the necessary steps so that this time, after the two previous times that it has been rejected by the Senate, that this time it be adopted by the Senate, and that finally we will be able to move forward to respect these rights. The Honourable Minister of Status of Women.
Speaker, and thank you to your question. I think we all want to see this legislation move forward quickly so that people, trans people, people of different gender identity and expression have the same protections that other Canadians do. And so I cannot speak to the committee's schedule, but what I can say is it is this government's sincere desire to see this become law as soon as possible.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And one of the things I think we should try to pick up on is the importance of Ottawa playing a strong national leadership on this whole issue. We know in terms of that the provinces also have a role to play. And by Ottawa taking action such as this, that we are in fact once again reinforcing, I would argue, not only a strong international leadership on such an important file, but we're also providing, I believe, the opportunity for provinces to look in terms of what is happening, because not all provinces are in fact the same. So it is in good part a leadership issue also, and ask if the Minister would provide comment further on that.
Honourable Minister of Status of Women.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. In fact, this is an important signal of leadership. When elected officials gather together and determine that a group of people deserve the same protections as all other Canadians, that is a strong indication of leadership. But we're joining other provinces that have made movement in this regard as well, and that are taking steps to ensure that those of us that are the most vulnerable, including people that are that have a different gender identity, have the right and the opportunity to live, contribute, and participate in their communities in fulsome ways. I think we're joining that work. But absolutely, the question of leadership is an integral one, and that is why we're so proud to be working on this issue today.
We have time for a very brief question. The Honourable Member for Saskatoon University.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Let me give a specific illustration why I will not be supporting this bill in my question. There was a rape counselling group in the Vancouver area that was hauled into the legal system because they refused to take as a counselor a gentleman who had transformed into a lady. The organization says it violated their principles. They only wanted someone who was the entire life a woman to be a rape crisis counselor. Why should organizations like rape counseling organizations be discriminated against under legislation like what the government is proposing?
Brief answer from the Minister.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I think the premise of the question is wrong. And I think that what it does is it instills the kind of fear that, in fact, this bill is trying to combat. That we have a role to play in showing and demonstrating to organizations across this country that this can be done well. It's happening, in my province of Ontario. I am so proud of a province that has taken steps to mandate this in their provincial organizations, that accommodation is provided and that people are supported through their journey. So, Madam Speaker, I reject the premise of the question.